This next demo is to show you something that we've called the mini Egan. So this is an abbreviated way of using the much more complex and lengthy Egan model to have a fruitful mentoring or coaching conversation. We've broken down the Egan model into the three core questions. So the first question is, what's going on? The second question is, what do you want instead? And the third question is, how are you going to achieve it? And what we've suggested with Mini Egan is that just using these three core questions, you can have a really fruitful conversation, and you can pad out each of those three sections with questions that you found to be really effective in your own mentoring or coaching work. So I'm going to demo this twice. So the first is going to be a really quick coaching conversation, literally just using those three core questions after I've introduced the issue with Nat. And then we're going to repeat the conversation, but this time padding out each of those three core questions with some additional questions just to bring some richness to the conversation. And we'll just see what happens in those two demos. Okay, so Nat, first of all, just give me a very quick idea of what the issue is that you're wanting to think through today.
Sure. So it's an issue based at work. It's to do with supervising new doctors to come onto the rota. And the issue is that that's become quite a burden for the supervising doctors who are sort of expected to do that. And it's kind of what to do about that ongoing, because yeah, that might be a difficult thing to raise.
Okay, so as you think about this, what's going on?
I think I work for an out of hours organisation, so there's been a big shift in the last year in terms of jobs and recruitment. So even the sort of water we're swimming in it is in a lot of flux, and GPs are making different decisions about careers and things. So there's been a big flux of GPs potentially wanting to do out of hours work, and my organisation is also keen to recruit new GPs to do this work. So, but that has been a sort of a new wave in the last year, which maybe we've not experienced quite those conditions before. And I think that has added pressure just in terms of numbers and capacity for needing to induct new GPs, and the burden of that on the few GPs that do that, but kind of realizing that that does need to happen because we do need GPs on the rota. So a little bit of tension in terms of the personal cost of doing that versus seeing the greater good.
Okay, what do you want instead?
I'm not opposed to inducting GPs at all, and in fact, I'm really motivated to do that. But I'd maybe like more consideration in terms of how that happens, and the communication around that. And now we're doing that a lot more frequently, like aligning expectations with what's reasonable. Yeah, that would be my ideal, I think, to improve, to better align expectations.
Better align expectations.
Mm.
Okay, so how are you going to achieve that?
I think even just talking about it now, you're like, oh, okay, so if that's the nub of the problem and that's where I'd like to be, that becomes a little bit simpler, because maybe that's just about communicating well in terms of what the current state of play is. And it may be that actually the people who are running the induction program aren't aware of the cost or the change that's happened in the last 12 months. So maybe the first step would just be to communicate that, this is the current reality, and at the moment it doesn't seem to be working very well. But just then raising that as a thing, maybe they weren't even aware of it. Even if they were, are the ways that we could better align expectations. What even are both our expectations? And if we could better align them, could we come up with a slightly different system for inducting that would suit all the parties?
Okay. So that's the end of our conversation. I just want to check in. What's happened to your thinking, just going through that?
Yeah, it's really powerful, isn't it? Even just asking those three questions with nothing else. There's a momentum and a trajectory, even with those three thoughts.
Mm.
So that first question gives you space to just unpack actually what is the problem, and then just giving that opportunity to say, well, what would be a better place. It really helps you to focus on the something needs to change, and then just having that final sort of practical, well, how are you going to do that? Even we didn't kind of get to real rubber on the road, did we? Who are you going to contact? Email, but just that almost doesn't matter. It's the concept of action, moving into action, and realizing that maybe that action isn't quite as big or scary as initially thought. So there was a sense in me of like, and that might actually be doable and that might work. And I'm quite motivated to do that. Even just, but if you just ask me how are you going to change it, I don't know that that would have worked as well than just having that little run up. So it's actually really effective. I'm surprised how effective that was.
Mm. Okay, so if you don't mind, we're going to try the
Yeah.
demo a second time, and this time we're just going to bring in a little bit more, meat on the bones for each of those core questions. So we'll rewind back to the initial, the
Oh.
initial issue. Okay, so Nat, if you don't mind, just share the issue that's on your mind that we're going to dig into.
So it's about inducting new GPs. I recognise there's been a change in the sort of the whole lay of the land in terms of GP jobs, and demand and supply, but it has influenced the expectations of needing to induct more GPs, and there has been a burden on the GPs that do that.
Mhm. Okay.
I think it's leaving me feel a bit sort of taken for granted, if I'm honest, that suddenly, I feel it feels a little bit unreasonable, kind of how the new system has morphed. And I feel a little bit taken for granted. I can see the greater good, and I am motivated, and I always have been motivated to induct GPs, and it can be quite good fun, but it feels like too much at the moment, and I feel like it's pushing me to want to do something about it.
Mm. Unreasonable and taken for granted. Tell me more.
Mm, yeah, that's kind of a lot of boils down to a lot of the sort of grouches in the NHS, doesn't it? Um, yeah, I think that's maybe just about the way things are communicated. Often it's last minute, or you don't even know you're inducting somebody. They just rock up and they stand there, and you're like, I wasn't expecting you. And there's an element of wanting to feel mentally prepared, practically prepared for having somebody with you. It's quite an intense thing. So you've got somebody sat in with you for 5 hours. They're watching your consultations. You're training them on the computer. You're doing icebreaker with them, getting to know them. So it's quite an intense, not unpleasant, but an intense experience. You sometimes then sat in with them, and that adds layers to that relationship. So it can be quite exhausting. And so if it's just occasionally, that's fine. But if it's every shift, then it just becomes too much. And I feel like I never signed up to every shift, and it's kind of morphed into doing that. And I feel like it's too much. But maybe, and nobody checked or considered that. But then equally, I haven't raised it. I'm just grumbling about it and being a bit of a martyr to it without actually being clear about how it's affecting me.
So what impact is it having on you?
Um, it's just sort of the amount of energy those shifts will take is more than a normal shift. So it leaves me feeling tireder afterwards. It's sometimes you're putting yourself out there a bit more because somebody's sitting in on your consultations, which is fine, but maybe a little bit uncomfortable. Sometimes you just want to do your own thing. So you're making yourself a bit more vulnerable with somebody. Um, uh, there's no breaks. You have them the whole time, um, which is quite intense. Whereas normally, you might get a little bit of downtime just between patients, just to housekeep yourself. So I think the intensity and the energy are the biggest kind of costs in the actual task.
Hmm. What would the wisest person you know say about the impact it's having on you?
Yeah, I think they'd probably say it was reasonable to feel like I do.
Mm,
And that, of course, those things are going to be more intense and onerous and draining. So it's okay to feel a bit protective of yourself. And
mhm,
maybe that's gone over a sort of boundary in terms of what I'm happy to give and provide. You don't get paid any extra for it. It's something you do as sort of just what you do. And it's maybe just gone over a boundary for me in terms of what I'm happy to give and
mm,
do. And that's okay. It's okay to feel a bit like that. And maybe that boundary has been transgressed a bit and needs addressing. So maybe
mm,
validation.
Okay. So if you had to distill all of this into a question that you're trying to answer for yourself, what's the question in all of this?
Um, why do I feel resentful about inducting GPs?
Hmm. Hmm. And what's your current answer to that?
Um, that on some level it is reasonable to feel resentful because when I look at what's happened and the change in expectations, the lack of communication and the what I have the cost for me is all understandably sort of a sort of quite a negative experience. But equally, when I'm thinking about it, I've kind of allowed that to happen without saying anything. So, whilst I'm saying my boundaries have been transgressed, I haven't stood up for my boundaries myself. So, there is some responsibility with me as well in terms of, um, you know, talking about this and communicating it and not assuming that people are going to know how I feel, because that's a bit unreasonable from my side of things.
Hmm. Okay. So let's explore kind of blue sky thinking. What do you want instead?
Um, so I'd really like a really kind of clear plan in terms of how the process works. So just a really clear protocol, and maybe it's slightly boundaried. So it says something like, will only needs to commit to inducting somebody once a week or for 3 hours or whatever feels sort of more reasonable. That the GP who's supervising is always emailed and with this much notice and is able to say no if they can't fit it that day. So there's an element of control back on who's doing it. Um, and maybe some appreciation of like, oh wow, you've been doing this and you've taken up the slack and it's been hard and you've done great, which would sort of counter that being taken for granted feeling. Maybe recognizing it's been brilliant and we've got this number of GPs on board now and it's really helped the organization, rather than it's sort of going unnoticed. So that would be my ideal.
What's happened to your energy as you notice that ideal?
Yeah, I suddenly perked up, didn't I? Oh,
Yeah.
some recognition, finally. I'm a person who is one of my drivers is verbal encouragement and affirmation. Okay. So maybe even personally for me, knowing that in this situation, I'm not getting any of that. And I don't want to be needy and need that, but just recognizing that would be nice. But you often don't get unless you sort of ask for that a little bit. So I think I probably just need to be clearer in terms of how I'm feeling, and how it might feel for my colleagues in this situation, but also to think about this positively in terms of, well, what can we do about it? How can we make this work better? I don't think it's rocket science, just a few tweaks, and hopefully we're all on the same page.
Mm. So with that in mind, what opportunities are there for change?
Um, So maybe some collaboration with the other GPs that do it, who I don't always talk to about this. Are they feeling the same? And that might be quite a unifying, like edifying experience that I get a chance to talk to them and get their feedback as well, which will help my relationships with them. And then equally having a good conversation with the rota team who arrange these things, but trying to make that a really positive experience. So it's actually like, oh, this is a bit of a hurdle for us all, but if we can get over this and it go well, then we can look back in terms of that being a really positive experience that we got to know one another better through, because there's not a lot of cross-pollination between the different teams. So maybe just the opportunity to do that would be more than if this had never happened. It might actually be a positive, a bonus in those situations.
Mhm. And thinking of the person that knows you best, what would they say are the kind of the positives in all of this?
I think it just increases your self-awareness that um it's often feeling that frustration, but not quite knowing why you're feeling it. And are you the only one feeling it? And then just being able to have a think about that and unpack it and realize that, there are certain things that maybe you need, or the expectations are different. And then it just helps you to be more self-aware. So it's then about being, talking and communicating well. If somebody knew me well, they would know that I prioritize good communication, that I don't mind being open about how I'm feeling, but I would want to do that well and have integrity in those conversations. So they'd want me to sort of champion those values in how I proceeded with trying to find a way through this, but also that I might grow in that experience.
Mhm. Okay. So rubber on the road, how are you going to achieve this? I'm going to invite you just to tell me anything that comes to mind that is sort of a definite thing you can do.
Okay, so just opening that up there then. So maybe we've got a WhatsApp group with all the other GPs who supervise. So I could just float a non-judgmental comment. How's the supervision going for people, the inductions, and just get a sort of flavour of what comes out. They might not feel open to complain about it on that. So it might be that I could also have maybe a couple of just water machine conversations about how actually is it going? Have you had anybody turn up that you weren't expecting? How did that make you feel? And just sort of tap into how it's working practically, but also how they're feeling about it. And there might be different ways of engaging people with that. And then that will help me realize, is this just me that I'm representing, or is it everybody? And in some ways, if it's everybody, then that makes it a bit easier because it becomes a bit more of a generic conversation. And then I could bring that up with the team that oversees this. So how to do that? It's got to be careful on email that doesn't come across as just being grumpy. Maybe a phone conversation, because I'm not always in the same site as them, and maybe just having a little sort of non-defensive chat. And then maybe following that up with an email with a bit more of a sort of bullet point, things that we could refine, but sort of trying to approach it in an optimistic, can do, like, is it working for you as well as the rota team? Like, how could the GPs be better? Maybe I could make it more of a collaborative thing. But hoping that the outcome of that would be to sort of rewrite a protocol, which I wouldn't mind being involved with. I probably wouldn't want to do from scratch, but I could oversee or edit if that was developed. I'd be happy to input into that constructively. So we
Mhm.
might end up with that, and then we start that working, and then hopefully that all just feels really different, much more positive.
Mhm. Okay, so I'm just going to invite you to write a sentence just to pull all those threads together of the ideas that you've had there. So the first part is I want to, and then fill in something that you want to do. The
Mhm.
next is I can, fill in something you can do. And the last one is I will, and then you write in what you will do. So I want to, I can, and I will.
Okay. I want to improve the induction experience, probably for everyone.
Mhm.
It's probably no fun if you rock up and nobody's expecting you from the other side of things. I can um, communicate well to bring together thoughts and ideas. I will commit to developing a new induction protocol. There we go.
How are you feeling?
Yeah. Oh my goodness, what have I just committed to? Yeah, yeah, really good. It's funny, isn't it? It's this one's more rubber on the road, and also this one gives you more kind of fuel.
Mhm.
So it's that kind of that feelings behind it and unpacking that and looking at those perspectives of other people, I felt just give me a bit more kind of, oh, I really need to do this. Whereas before it felt more of a sort of a practical problem I needed to solve, which
Mhm.
was fine and it was motivating, but this
Mhm.
felt like it went a bit deeper. And
Mhm.
then equally with the coming up with the plan, it was much more kind of detailed and how what the actual hows and what the practical implications of that. And then actually these three questions at the end are real dynamite, aren't they? They sort of really make you kind of, as much as you want to, but they really make you kind of pin it down a little bit in terms of what's going on here. How am I going to affect this
Mhm.
in a you know, in maybe a unexpected way?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, great. And with the two demos, the first one was probably not even 5 minutes. The second one, we've maybe been, I don't know, 20, 25 minutes, but
okay.
both of them fairly short, but still honoring the kind of framework of the Egan model. So that forward trajectory and ending with something which is an action or a sense of what's going to happen next, the next step. So hopefully useful. Great.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll stop now.